Hello everybody. So I've been talking along these lines for a little while, but I wanted to ask the question, if you were protesting climate change, what should be on your banners? Now, should they be protesting it at all? Well, perhaps they should. Climate change is obviously real, and we've been saying it's real for more than 30 years. I mean, I can't remember a time in my life when we weren't talking about it. We've given it different names, but it's definitely real. We know that it's real. We know that our climate is changing. There's no doubt about that. And we know that this can lead to long-term, permanent damage to the Earth itself, which in turn, worst case, could destroy the Earth completely or make it, at the very least, uninhabitable. But more likely, it could accelerate the next cataclysm. So the last cataclysm was 12,500 years ago, 12,600, and there's a few debates about the time. Could have been 15,000, 14,000, 17,000. We're not 100% sure. But we call that one the Younger Dryas, and we know that that one destroyed 99% of all life on Earth. So it's a big deal. And we also know it was targeted, and it was aimed at the area that is popularly known as Atlantis. And we know that's not the actual name that it was ever used. It was never called the Atlantis while it was alive, while it was, until it was destroyed. So it was destroyed and then it was called Atlantis. But we're talking about Atlantis. Now we also know that Atlas, the Titan, the Greek Titan, or the Greek old god, didn't exist until thousands of years after Atlantis was destroyed. And we know that Atlantis was not based on him. So we know that's a lie. We know that the god Poseidon, which they say there's a temple there, is not based on him. And we know that other aspects about Atlantis are probably not true. We don't know for sure which bits are true and which bits aren't true. But we do know that a place that matches the description of Atlantis did exist and does exist to this day. It's still there. It's exactly where it was supposed to be, and it looks exactly like it's supposed to look, at least how it would look after it's been targeted in a cataclysm. Another thing that we know is that the Mayans came from that land. They called it Mu, or possibly another name, but that's one name that's more likely than Atlantis. It's at least a name that existed before Atlas existed. And it's a name that the Mayans claim to be from that land. Well, we don't know, they might have been lying. But we know that they claim to be from there. And we know that the Mayan culture started almost exactly the same time as the Great Flood came, the last great cataclysm. Now, another thing that we know, or at least the Mayans claim, they might be lying again, but they claim that that was the fourth cataclysm. And in fact, they were predicting a fifth one to happen at 2012. Now, that was an actual prediction, or as far as the date, or just a sort of a rough guess, I don't know. But 4 cataclysms. So in other words, that the Mayan culture, at least in Mu, was 4 cataclysms old by the time of that great cataclysm. In other words, about, let's say, minimum 50,000 years old. Now, apparently they say they were there for 20 to 25,000 years. Let's be a bit flexible there. They certainly survived at least one other cataclysm. So this is a culture that we know survived a cataclysm. And the second one, which we know was targeted at there. It was targeted at Mu, it was targeted at Atlantis. And still some of them survived and went all the way to America, to Mexico, as the first ever people to go to the Americas. Yes, we know that people came to North America afterwards, but they were there about 1,000 years before them. And the ones that came to North America had to wait for the north to unfreeze, when they went to Mexico, that Mexico was never frozen. They went by boat. And they settled Mexico before they settled Canada and modern day USA. They went to Mexico first. The Mayans went to Mexico. The Mayans never went to the north. Well, maybe a little bit, but they weren't really Mayans by then. So that's the thing, is that this is a culture that had the technology to survive a cataclysm. There's a culture that knows what caused the cataclysm. Now, we don't know what caused that cataclysm. We know there were a lot of meteors. We also know that perhaps there was a comet or even two. And we know that these objects came to Earth. We don't know why they were able to come to Earth and do this much destruction, given that we had this protective layer. Meteors come to Earth all the time and are most of the time completely destroyed by our protective layer. Sometimes a little bit of them comes through. But it's been billions of years since there's been a big enough hole for the full meteor to come through, such as the one that caused the Grand Canyon. So why were the meteors able to come through? And this is one thing, one of the things about climate change was that hole in the ozone layer, and we talk about how our pollutions wither away that protective layer. Now, I don't know for sure, but it's certainly possible, at least from what I know, that the last cataclysm was caused by pollution. That the people of the earth at that time were perhaps too many of them and too polluting, and they created that hole. And that hole then let these meteors, which are coming perhaps anyway, perhaps they just come regularly, but it let them through because there was too big a hole and we didn't care enough about it. And perhaps then we have a reason to get all upset about the climate change, because we are seeing these holes, this thinning of the protective atmosphere. And perhaps this may cause a meteor to come down. Now, why were the meteors aimed at Mu? Perhaps they weren't. There was meteors in North America as well. And there weren't even anybody living in North America. So they were all over the world. But there was certainly a congestion around Mu, around Atlantis. And we know where Atlantis was. I'll say it several times. It's the richat structure. It has another name in Arabic, in the local language, but I can't pronounce that, so I'm not going to say it. But it's in Mauritania, and it's exactly where it's always been. It's where it's been said to be. And we've known from satellite images for 50 years that it was there. And we've been saying that for 50 years. And in fact, before those satellite images, we knew, based on historical documents, that that was where it was. It's never been a mystery. It's never been fiction. It's always been plain fact. Now, that doesn't mean that every little story about it is true. We know that it was not founded by the Titan named Atlas. We know that there is no temple of Poseidon there. We know that it was not a Greek colony. We know that Greece was a colony of Atlantis, or at least of Mu, or whatever name it went by at that time. We know that Greece was a colony of that. We know that Italy was a colony. We know that the Greeks and the Italians probably had people living there that were originally from Mu, and perhaps the current Greek and Italian cultures, and probably other places around the world, Egypt, Punt. Now, Punt is Somalia. We know where that is. There's no little disputes about that. But all those lands probably are related to the Muans, and that's not counting the Mayans and the Native Americans. So there are people alive today who have descended from these people. People in Greece, people in Italy, people in Somalia, people in Egypt, and people in, well, Central America for sure. And we don't know how many, but there's probably quite a lot of them, probably millions, maybe billions even. And the thing is, if we were to excavate and dig up under the richat, which is not protected by anyone, it's not a sacred site, nobody even lives there. If we were to dig underneath that place, we could find the answer, or at least a clue, as to what caused the last cataclysm. and also, almost certainly, how they were able to survive at least one, but probably 2 or 3 previous cataclysms. How did they survive the other ones, and why didn't they survive that last one? We would find that, at least some hints towards that, if we were to dig up the richat. And we won't dig it up. So if you're a climate change protester, I want you to demand of your government to send out an exploratory force, dig up the richat, and find out every little morsel of information about what happened there. While you're at it, dig up Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which has only been 5% dug up. Almost certainly that also has clues as to what happened in the last great cataclysm and what life was like before the last great cataclysm. How advanced our technology was, how many people were on Earth. Was it 2,000 like some people claim? Or was it 15 billion? There's a fair bit of difference between the two. Did we have no technology, or did we have a technology so advanced that we may never get there again? You know, we need to know, and it's really important to know. I mean, if cataclysms happen every 30,000 years and humanity's existed for 3 million, that's 100. That's 100 times. And if each time our entire society is destroyed and we have to start over again, we're up to number 100 or 101 perhaps. And perhaps we should start putting in place something so that we can continue on. Perhaps that is what Göbekli Tepe was. Perhaps that's what we should be doing, so that we don't go backwards every time, so that we can move forward. And somewhere there's a hint for how to build those Egyptian pyramids, and perhaps we should learn how to do it. Alright, so that's it for me. So remember, dig up the richat. Big deal. Okay, bye.